just started asking you about, have you ever had situations where after the film was in the can that you said, oh, I didn't quite get that through line the way it should have been?
Well, yeah, it's a tricky question, and I'm probably not going to answer it. I can tell you that when I made this film about Lena Horne, I only had an hour, and I can't look at the film anymore because I made the film I wanted to make, and then I ran out of time, and so the end of it is like, big clip, So I didn't. The film couldn't play. I needed more time.
Why was it decided to only be an hour?
I think that's probably all the time I had. It was in the schedule already, and it should have been able to be expanded, but probably didn't have the money or the time. I don't remember, it was a while ago. We just had that. I think it's gone now. That opportunity's gone. But when Lena died, we went back to all the rights holders. When I say the rights holders, every still, every clip, every piece of footage in the film. And they all agreed to let us run the film again as on an obituary basis without any payment. And I was really proud of that. And we're working on that for all of the, people who have made films about who are still alive, starting with the oldest. I'm not going to say who. I wouldn't want anybody to see that. But, so that we can, when Don Hewitt died, we were the first people that was called, can you put the 60 Minutes show out again? That involved one phone call because all the material was CBS, and they were sure, fine. When Les Paul died, it was already in rights. But we have a lot of that. We're when a major artist dies, I think we're the first place the networks call.
Do you ever update before it goes back on?
We never have time for that. We just put an in memoriam on there. I am considering going back to some of the subjects we did early. I'd love to redo our Marty Scorsese film. I'd like to bring it up to date. We made it very early. Relatively early in his career. He hadn't done, I think he was in the middle of Goodfellas.
Yeah. Now that you know,
he had done Raging Bull already, but he's done a tremendous amount of great work since we did the film.
Yeah, but you also probably forged a personal relationship.
Yeah, and I'd love to really go back and revisit that because I think he's one of our greatest filmmakers. I don't feel like we get it right every single time, and I feel pretty good about my Bernstein film. My Joni Mitchell film, I feel pretty good about it too. I don't think I missed the point. I wish I'd had a little more time on that one, but I'm still pretty proud of that. Serling, I thought, was a really interesting, an interesting approach. I feel pretty good about it. Have you ever seen it?
Yes.
Did you like it?
I did.
Yeah, that was my first one. I really do like it very much.
Yeah, it was very different.
Yeah, and I'd love us to be able to do more of that. But not everything lends itself to that.
How did you choose Serling to be your first one out?
Oh, I don't know. I just thought I could tell that television people were very popular, and I had a relationship at CBS because we had done a couple of other things, and they owned all of Twilight Zone, and they owned all of Playhouse 90. So between the two, Serling was the first writer of Playhouse 90, and he wrote the first and the last Playhouse 90s and a bunch in between, and he was really the television's last angry man, and railing against corporate sponsorship and how they were affecting choice of material. And so it was, in some ways, it was a little bit of a practical choice because it was one-stop shopping, so to speak. If CBS says, yes, you can do it, and they agreed to put it out on home video, and I didn't have to pay for any of the licensing. And there aren't a whole lot of situations where there's kind of one-stop shopping like that. Judy Garland was another one, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Warner the whole way. They owned the MGM library, and they owned Star is Born because it was a Warner picture. One-stop shopping. And CBS thought it was a great idea. So, and I thought it was a great story. Really a good story. I mean, this is a guy who nobody who, unless you know about the early days of television, even had any clue that Rod Serling was involved in that. Everybody just thought of him as Twilight Zone, that guy up there in Twilight Zone. But the story was so much richer than that. He was the guy who was this really facile writer who wrote, was in the early days of live television, writing Requiem for a Heavyweight, and really wanted to tackle things. He was going to tackle racism and tackle, homogeneity and, everything. And he was able to do that at the beginning, and then as sponsors began to become more powerful in television, they began to say, you got to water this down, you got to water this down, you can't write about this, you can't write about that, and you have to couch it in this, you have to couch it in that, and he got really pissed off and left and went to move west, to Hollywood, and said, I'm going to create a series, a science fiction series, because I can have Martians say things that human beings can't. And so he creates a series that's totally about all the messages and things he wanted to do when he was at Playhouse 90. And it became one of the most popular shows ever on television. And he ended up embarrassing himself by doing terribly bad commercials for Argyle socks and things like that. So it was a good dramatic story. And a lot of very good people still around to help tell it. People who've been in Twilight Zones, people who've worked on them. A lot of people left from Playhouse 90, most of them now gone.
Did you do the interviews yourself?
Yeah, I did all the interviews, yeah. And I loved doing that. And I liked framing it as a Twilight Zone episode, which was a lot of fun to do. That was a 35 millimeter shoot. Couldn't do that today. But only because the great cameraman, who's a friend of mine, Fred Murphy, helped me out, to charge me what he would have charged. He's a motion picture cameraman. But I wanted to look like the Twilight Zone. And the Twilight Zone was shot in 35 millimeter black and white. Now we didn't, we shot that 35 millimeter black and white. And the rest of the film was not. It was shot in film, but it was shot in color, and we took the color out because we did all these tests and couldn't match it. By shooting in black and white, because the black and white stock in 16 millimeter hadn't been developed properly. So it just looked better to shoot in color and take the color out. But one of my proudest moments of all time was when we were in post-production on that film, and people were coming in, sound mixers and whatever. We were in this post-production facility, and they'd look up and they'd say, oh, I remember that episode. And it was our opening. It looked so much like a Twilight Zone, and it was really fun to do.
Did you ever feel a kinship with him, just in terms of how passionate he was about?
Yeah, totally. I felt that's a very good question. Yes, I totally understood that he was fighting for something in the way I feel like I've been fighting for something. I haven't sold that yet. I haven't done an Argyle socks commercial, but. I felt, he was ultimately a very sad character, because Twilight Zone ended, and then he went off and sort of did a kind of grade B version of it called Night Gallery, which was everything he didn't want it to be. And he was the host on that, and he gradually became he had been at one time a highly respected writer, and then he was less respected. But I did relate to the passion, and I felt compassion for his story. I think it's important to feel compassion for your subjects, because they're not all. Many of them are fallen idols. They are. They're not everybody. They're often not who you expected them to be, and sometimes can be very disappointing meeting, someone you've admired tremendously. And now you're making a film about them, and you are getting to know them, and not quite what you thought. Sometimes, pardon me?
Did it happen a lot to you?
It's happened a few times. I'm not going to say who. Also had the wonderful experience of meeting some people who I was terrified of and thought they're not going to even want to give me the time of day, and ended up, realizing they were human beings too. Gore Vidal's a really good example of that. I was such an admirer of his, but he's so smart. I thought he's not going to want to talk to any of us, but he was absolutely wonderful and accessible and lovely man. I mean, even though he's a Serbic, but he was very honored, I think, that we made the film. So I've met some of the most amazing people. I really have, and I've become friendly with many of them. And some of their families. I'm very close to the Bernstein kids still, and I feel very privileged You know what I do? I feel privileged when people allow us to come into their life and tell their story and trust us to do it right. But I think we've earned that trust, but it never is less of a privilege. Each time, it's a tremendous privilege. I feel really fortunate. I sound like an ad now, but I really feel that. I feel it very much. Go ahead.
Are there other programs that you were specifically proud of that we haven't talked about?
James Baldwin. I think James Baldwin is one of our best films. And that's a man, that's an interesting story. We were originally going to do that film with Al Maisels as a verite film because Jimmy Baldwin was writing a book on the children of the slain black leaders, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King. And it was going to be a trip through the South with Jimmy as he was, meeting these kids and doing this book. But then Jimmy died. And Al and I got together, and we were both on the same page that, what now had to happen wasn't the kind of film he made. He's a verite filmmaker, and I still wanted to make this film about Jimmy Baldwin. And he said, well, there's this young girl who's been working on it as a researcher, and she's really passionate. She really has a good sense of what this is about. I think you should talk to her. So we met. Her name is Karen Thorson, and it's her first movie. And I said, okay, those are the days I could do that. Well, that's another whole subject. Remind me to come back to that subject, choice of director. And I felt she really did have a handle on it, and she's so passionate, and she'd done so much research, and she found out so much about it. And we made a great film. That's a person that I literally fell in love with in the edit room. I mean, you cannot. He's mesmerizing, absolutely mesmerizing. His face is so beautiful, and he's so eloquent. He was a preacher's son, and all that's there. And you talk about a passionate man. But there was also a very sad story in there too. I mean, not sad, but a complicated one where he had to leave this. He was gay. He had to leave this country for a while. It was just a great film, and so much footage of him. And that film will last forever, like the Bernstein film will last forever. That led me to something I wanted to say. In the early days, I was able to give a lot of chances to first-time filmmakers, and I really liked doing that. I mean, with guidance and a good team around them, because I think that's really important to develop new talent. And the BBC used to have a system, when documentaries were very strong, where you started as a researcher, you moved up, eventually you got to direct a film, and you had this constant pool of new talent that you were developing. And when you made a film, you got to make another film right away. You did that well, you got to make another film right away. You got to hone your skills. The way it all works now, first of all, it's sometimes years between films while we're trying to raise the money, and that's just very hard for filmmakers to sustain a life. But also, the more high visibility these films have become, the harder it is the more that I think estates and subjects want to be involved in who's going to direct the film. And everybody wants a famous filmmaker. And it's not always the right choice. It just isn't always the right choice. Making a documentary is a very, very different experience than making a feature film. Sidney Pollack, when we did Frank Gehry with him, Sketches of Frank Gehry, Sidney Pollack directed it. He did a great job. But he told me that it was his last film, actually, sadly. He said, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. I had no idea how hard it was to make a documentary, because in a movie you have a script. You get that script really great, you work on that script, and then you shoot. And you shoot that script. In a documentary, you don't know where you go. You don't know what's going to happen. In that case, it was kind of a verite film of him going around with Frank Gehry and having these conversations, and somebody filming them sometimes. And so it didn't really have a strong through line. That's why it was called Sketches of Frank Gehry. You could have a little scene, and then you could go to black, and you could have another scene. So it was a very different kind of film, but wonderful. And I wanted to call it Two Jewish Men Sitting Around Talking, but Sidney didn't like that idea. But Sydney is a filmmaker who recognized that making documentaries is a very, very different art than making a feature film. You are finding your story as you're going along, and you're mostly finding it in an edit room, which means you need to sit in that edit room morning, noon, and night for as long as it takes to play out every option and do this and do that until you've got it. That's the reason that Ken Burns and Rick Burns and David Grubin's films are so great, is that they spend a lot of time in the edit room. I think I heard that Ken used to say it took 32 weeks in an edit room for every hour of film. Now, if you can do that. Most people can't afford it. I've fought very hard for us to have at least 18 weeks. But sometimes we've had to do it in less. And I think the less time in the edit room, the more it shows in the film, frankly. But this has become a little bit of an issue where people think, well, I'm so important, so why don't I have a famous filmmaker making this film about me? And not recognizing that the very best film is going to come out of a documentary filmmaker who's going to give it 300% of them until it's right. And that's just a new thing I'm facing a lot right now, which I'm hoping I can do something about. But I used to be able to just say, you're going to make this film, you're going to make this film, and that was it. It's not quite as easy anymore.
Well, how was that matchmaking process, though, in terms of pairing the subject with that filmmaker?
Well, you get a sense of somebody's interests. On Kappa, for example, I called Ann Makepeace, had made a film on Edward Curtis, the photographer with all those credible Indian photographs of the Indians, which is how we even know a tremendous amount of what that culture was, even though he staged a bunch of it. But it was based on what had been a reality, anyway. And I loved her film, which, circles of life. I met Anne at Sundance probably in '83. I think I went to Sundance in '83. And she was one of our filmmakers there with a script called Jules, which never did get made. But she wanted to make a feature film about Edward Curtis. And I said, well, I'm going to do this series called American Masters, for which I had absolutely no commitments yet. And I said, so if you ever change your mind, decide to do a documentary instead of a feature, come see me. Well, we became great friends, and we're great friends now. And she did, in fact, do a documentary, and I helped her. We didn't initiate it, but I helped her get it finished. And so when I got the rights to Kappa, because I knew she loved photography and she was a good storyteller, I called her up and I said, I think I've got a really great project for you, but you have to move to New York, because she lived in Santa Barbara at the time. And she said, are you going to tell me what it is? I said, not till you tell me whether you're going to move to New York. Anyway, she moved to New York, which was good, and made this wonderful film. But I know my filmmakers pretty well. I mean, I spend a lot of time getting to know filmmakers, and I know their sensibilities and what I think they'd be really good at. And if you have, some filmmakers are better with archive and don't really want to do all that much shooting. Others are much more comfortable following a live subject around, and archive is is a minor element of the film. And you have to know their work, and you have to know their strengths, and what their interest would be, and whether you think they'll mesh with the artist if the artist is around, and if not, how they'll mesh with the material. And so storytelling skills come very much into that. But I wouldn't ask. There's some filmmakers I wouldn't even ask to do a totally archived film, because their strength is in verite and working with a live subject. So that's it's pretty simplistic, but that's how I think about it. Also, availability has something to do with it. If you've got something and you're ready to go, who's available. Not that I would ever give an important subject to somebody I thought wasn't the right filmmaker, but if there's a choice between 1, 2, and 3, and one's available and the other 2 aren't, that'll sometimes do that too.
When you first asked them to do that film, what do you tell them? What kind of guidelines do you give them out the door?
Not very much, actually. I say, we've got, here's what we have to give you. We got the rights. You've got to have, you're not. I also try to get the rights in a very unencumbered way, because I don't want to bring in a filmmaker and say, you know, you're gonna make this film about Preston Sturgis, I don't know, pick a subject. But you can only, you know, you're limited to 30-second clips, and you can't have more than one from any single movie, or whatever, you know. Try not to tie the hand, because I am a filmmaker too. I know what I need when I'm in the edit room. I try to get that. So if I make a deal with the studios, I try to get it so that we have an aggregate. We're not limited to 30 seconds. We can do more than one scene, so we can really work with the material in a filmic way and in a storytelling way, or the photographs, or whatever. So I basically say, here's what you have. Let's sit down and talk about who needs to be interviewed. I actually first start by giving them a little bit of money to spend some time thinking about it, actually. What we call the research and development. So they have a little time to go off and read and think and screen and come up with some ideas.
Now, have you already done that? Have you really looked at the person's life beforehand, just so you have an idea?
Yeah, I usually read whatever the most important biography is about the person, so I know so when I'm getting a treatment, I know what may or may not be there, whether they've done a thorough job. But in a treatment, I'm not looking for something, a kind of a summary of somebody's life. I'm looking for a vision, a take, how I would do this film. And I don't expect that either to be the film, because I know they have to go through a process and that'll change. But I'm looking for a spark of originality in it. And I know if that's there and they've got a basic good take on it, that it's going to be a good film, because I've seen their work too. And these are people I usually know pretty well. And it goes through all kinds of metamorphosis between that point and the finishing of the film. I know the one thing I said to Anne on Kappa was, think of it as a movie. Everybody's wanted to make a movie about this guy's life. You're now getting a chance to do that. Make it a movie. And so that got her thinking about some recreation stuff that we did. So the film starts out with a guy in a jail cell being beaten up, because that's what happened in Budapest to Kappa, and why he had to leave. So it's just totally different than the way I think most people think of documentaries. We do recreations. We do them very sparingly, and I've never done them with dialogue. I'm nervous about moving over into that territory, unless you're working from an absolute transcript. Like recently, there was an Oppenheimer film that David Grubin did for American Experience, which did have dialogue. I can't remember who the actor was. I can't remember, somebody famous. But that was based on a real script. I don't like I don't like to do scenes where you're speculating. But we do dramatic recreations where we think that they will help the story and give it a filmic context. It's a controversial area, dramatic recreations and documentaries.
Let's talk a little about your management style and the team that you work with here at 13.
Well, I have a couple of great people, been with me a long time. I don't know that I can talk about my management style. I don't know that I have one. I'm not exactly seat of the pants, but I don't think, I never took a course in management, And also, I think I like to think I'm a good boss, and I care about people who work for me, and I think they enjoy it. But you have to remember, when I started this series, as I said, nobody believed in it. I think it was me and a secretary, for a long time. I sort of had one other person that gradually built up. And now I think we're quite a well-oiled operation. I have two top people who handle. I'm really the editorial person, almost exclusively. But I have people who handle a lot of the technical aspects, who are great line producer people, who handle press and events and functions and rights clearances, all that kind of stuff. What I do is I have the idea, I get the rights, I negotiate the material as I think we need to have it, so that we have as few encumbrances as possible, put the creative team together. I have final cut, I'm in the edit room a lot, and I'm working on a whole lot of things at one time, trying to think ahead. to what we should be making, what's going to be on the air in 2012, you know, and through 2013, because it takes a while to make these films. And I also pretty much deal with the scheduling because I have a good idea of when things should be scheduled, and I work with PBS on that. And I've tried real hard to maintain this monthly presence.
Is it getting hard to do that?
I think that they're moving in another direction, and I think they'd like us to be more tent poles, you know, bigger footprint. I don't quite know why they're so concerned about it, but they somehow feel that this weekly, and not just with me, I think that in general, I think they're worried about how do you bring in a weekly audience, you know, when the audiences are eroding, and that maybe they think that it'd be better for their funds to be spent on bigger footprint in the schedule projects, multi-parts. You know, Dylan, I think they would have considered a tentpole because it was over 2 nights. We've got a couple of those coming up. I'm a little concerned because I don't know how many subjects can actually sustain 5 hours. But I want to hold on. I think it's very important that that should be a great new thing where we have these and there's some real promotion behind them in the way that Dylan did. But I would hate it to be at the sacrifice of there'll never be another writer or painter or architect biography on television, because they really can't really be tentpoles. You know what a tentpole is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, trying to maintain that balance between the two of them. And I don't even remember what the question is that you asked that led me to. Do you remember what you asked me?
I don't know. We've actually just kind of been
Right,
scrolling
okay.
along on things, but we were talking about choice of directors, and then that sort of moved into this. But how important is it for you to continue working?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Oh, I love working, and I love making these things happen, and I love being in the edit room. And I think one of the great things about being an artist, and I don't put myself in the artist category in the way that people are going to make films about, but I am in a creative field, is that unless you lose your mind, your skills just get better, you know, I think. And you don't really have to think about retiring. I may not want to be at the forefront of fighting for another 15 years to keep this thing alive. It might be nice just to make some films. But my energy is still completely there. I'm still completely passionately committed to this. So
I like that you called yourself an artist, because I'd be curious to know, what would the American Masters Susan Lacy piece look like?
there wouldn't be any footage. I'm making a film right now about a wonderful guy named David Geffen. Have you ever heard of David Geffen? And one of the problems I'm having, I'm directing that one, is that there's no footage. Or there's very little footage. There's some, but very, very little. This is not a man who lived in the public eye. And that would be the problem about me too, no footage. So you couldn't make it, couldn't do it. I can make a film about David because I can work with all of the archive of the artists whose careers he made happen, and the time, you know, LA in the 60s and the singer-songwriter movement and the troubadour and, you know, all this DreamWorks stuff and, you know, Geffen Records, I mean, and all the artists involved in that, all the theater work he was involved in. I've got great visual material. I just have no footage of him. And I'm concerned about that. He knows that. And trying to figure out how to make it work around that. I mean, the beauty of, and that has something to do, by the way, also with the selection of subjects. You know, sometimes there's somebody who would be a great subject, but very difficult to make a film about. You know, somebody really, really important, but very difficult to make a film. Because, you know, today, writers are so private, for example, writers. Think about Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, James Baldwin. Awash in photographs and footage. I mean, these people lived, they were, you know, documented. Imagine trying to make a film about Philip Roth, who I would love to make a film about. I think he, you know, comes out of his house, you know, he writes. And so you have to think about it in a very different way. of what's going to make a compelling film as opposed to a compelling article or a compelling talk show. What's going to make a compelling film? It is ultimately a visual medium. And if you don't have the visual material, you're in trouble. I'm not, on the Geffen film, that's not a problem because I have Joni Mitchell and I have Neil Young and I have Crosby, Stills and Nash and I have, Cats and I've got, Interview with Vampire and I've got all this stuff that he was involved with. But some subjects where there's very little to work with, you've got to really think, can I make a film? And how do I do that? So that does have something to do with it too. And some subjects are just better subjects. They're better talkers, they're more interesting on camera. Not every great artist is a great raconteur. So I don't think the film about me would be very interesting, is really the question. No.
You mentioned earlier that you had a list of people when you first started the series.
Yeah, Bob Dylan, Leonard Bernstein, Martha Graham, Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra, Barbra Streisand, just because I love her, George Gershwin. I should have looked that up. Somebody you've probably never heard of, Stieglitz, Alfred Stieglitz.
So really into photographers.
Well, also he brought modern art to America. So there's a bigger story. Again, there's a bigger story. When Life magazine came out at the turn of the century with their list of the 100 most important Americans of the century, I isolated the 30% of that were cultural figures. Stieglitz was on that list. And that's when I knew I was doing something right. And they were doing something right. They knew their stuff. Walt Disney was on my list. I take those lists seriously, and the truth is we've actually done, I would say, 90% of the people on that list of the 100 most important Americans of the century, and the cultural figures. Walt Disney's still there. Elvis Presley we haven't done. There's still a lot ahead. But I would say by and large the real, and the fact that Stieglitz was on that list says something about it. And I know about Stieglitz from my academic background. And we made a wonderful film about Stieglitz, who was also who was also Georgia O'Keeffe's husband. And we also did a film about her, a beautiful film about her, when she was still alive. Did you know that he was married to Georgia O'Keeffe? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think that some famous Hollywood director is trying to make a film about Stieglitz and O'Keeffe. There was recently a TV movie that Bob Balaban did, which was terrific, with Joan Allen and Jeremy Irons. But I'm not going to say who it is, but I think there's a pretty, potentially very important feature film in the works on this. Again, and I remember when I said I wanted to do Stieglitz, I literally had to tell people who he was. So I'm very impressed that you know. Did you know who Stieglitz was?
No.
Okay. Stieglitz was a very famous photographer in the early part of the century. But he also was the man who first brought modern art to America. He first exhibited Picasso and Braque and those guys. And that changed art forever. It changed American art forever because we saw them over here and changed everything. Anyway, very important guy. And he married Georgia O'Keeffe and made her a star.
In all your years of doing American Masters, how has technology changed the way the films work?
Well, I don't think I'm the best person to ask that question because really, truly, I'm not very technical. I think that the cameras have changed a lot, and I think that's made it easier, and I think they're better, and I think that things, you would know this much more than I do, but I know that we have cameras now that, we don't have to shoot on film, we can make it look like film. What do you think? What do you think are the best cameras today for docs?
Sony EX1, Sony EX3, solid state cameras.
What do you think of P2?
P2? People that have a lot of archives don't like them, but they make things cheaper and everything looks way better.
Here they want everybody to shoot on P2, and we mostly have to get exceptions because we deal with so much archive material and it makes it almost impossible. But I don't think, other than that, I don't think the technology, obviously Avid, but we used to do everything on film. We actually edited on film when I first started this series.
Do you like it? Do you like having the
I think the
visual-
Avid's great. I think the Avid's fantastic. I love it. I love the Avid. And we all thought we weren't going to be able to get used to it, but I think what everybody thought about the Avid is that it was going to make things faster, and that's not what it did. It made changing things faster, but it didn't actually change how long it actually took, because you can't substitute the thought process. I mean, the thought process is still what it is. But when you want to make a change, you want to try something, that you could do very quickly. And so that's been a big benefit. I love the Avid.
Where's all the master footage that you've done over the years?
Well, it's all over the place, but mostly it's at a place called Iron Mountain. That's another thing I'm very worried about with our move. You know, we actually keep one master of everything here. We actually maintain a little archive here, and because people are always asking for our films, and we like to make the DVDs from the master, and so I'm quite concerned about what we're going to do. I mean, we maintain a really large closet, and we are our own little archive.
What about the master footage, say, of the interviews and all the things?
Oh, that's all at Iron Mountain too. But you know, I'm really trying to figure out what to do with that stuff in the internet. There is a whole life for this on the internet, which, you know, you asked me about my management. I've still kept my staff very small. It used to just be me and one other person. Now it's me and 4 other people, and we do this whole series because I'd rather keep the money for the films than try to have a big overhead. So we all work really, really hard. So as a result of that, now each film has its own team. I'm just talking about the management of American Masters. It's really 5 people. I mean, me and 4 other people. But if I could expand that, and that is an area that I really would love to hope that one day I'll get some money for, is to figure out what to do with the archive we own and how to repurpose it for the internet. Because we own all those interviews, and we got clearances for all of that. So we are sitting on a treasure trove, an unbelievable treasure trove. We've been doing this for 24 years. And we've interviewed everybody, you know, that's famous. I mean, and we never did get interviewed with Sinatra, but you know what I'm saying. There's an amazing, amazing archive there that we have to figure out what to do with. And we will.
Is it at least catalog?
Oh, yeah.
You're in a really good spot.
Yeah. We have a Bible for every project, and we know where everything is, and at least we hope we do. At least I think we do. Lo and behold, we'll find out that we're missing all these Bibles, but I don't think so. We actually have found out that we are missing a few Bibles, but we're in the process of pulling all this stuff together. It's very important, particularly before any moves are made, that we have a handle on where everything is. You know, because some box doesn't get thrown out. That's one of the great stories, and one of our very first films that we ever did in American Masters was this thing called The Unknown Chaplain, which was made by Kevin Brownlow, who's this great silent film historian and has made the best films on the silent era. We've done everybody important in the silent era, I think. Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Charlie Chaplin, Lillian Gish, D.W. Griffith. And that amounts to about 12 hours right there, because everyone was a big, huge deal. But anyway, when Kevin was doing Chaplin, and he was visiting with Una O'Neill, Chaplin's widow, and she said, well, you know, I have some boxes over here. I don't know what they are, but you're welcome to go through them. And it turned out that it was all of his rehearsal footage, because he rehearsed on film. And that had been put someplace else, so it didn't burn up when his studio burned up. And this rehearsal footage showed all the alternative endings, for example, to City Lights, all the things that he didn't use. So you talk about, if she just hadn't looked in those boxes and just said, oh, there must be nothing important, I think I'll just throw them away. So we're going through that process right now, just making sure that doesn't happen. But can you imagine? And when that happened, the press said this was the equivalent in the film world of King Tut's tomb. Because Kevin and we were then able to create sequences where we actually, it was like being inside Charlie Chaplin's mind. And we could show how he developed a psyche what he threw out, what he's kept in. Can you imagine how exciting that was?
Oh, so you actually did end up being an archaeologist.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wasn't there when the boxes were found, but it was pretty exciting.
And actually going back, in the American studies and everything, you've seen so many people and talked to so many people and seen so much of history. What have you learned about American culture from doing this series?
Oh, goodness. Wish you'd told me you were going to ask that question. What have I learned about American culture? I think I'd have to think much more about that. I don't know that there are any big sweeping statements. I think I could say that I think race has been at the center of almost every aspect of American cultural development. And I know that sounds like a big overblown statement, but I think race is at the center of almost everything in American history. And I think it's certainly a huge element in American culture as well. I cannot tell you how many artists we've made films about, because we made films about a lot of African American artists who were, it was almost to the point of like, we better find some other footage here, because, they all had the experience of not being able to be on the road. Not being able to eat at the same restaurants as their band, or stay at the same hotels, or, and I think that from a literary standpoint, a musical standpoint, I think that's been a huge element. Also, I think, I don't think this is anything new, but there are some elements of culture that are distinctly American. Jazz, movies, and I think now we have a kind of very distinct American literature. I don't think I'm answering this question terribly well, but any culture, well, maybe not. Maybe in France, where they've been around for thousands and thousands of years, it takes a lot more time for things to change. And then it's a bigger deal, like the French New Wave or whatever. But I think that we are because we're really basically a very free country. And I think culture and art have been able to move with the times much more easily. There have, of course, been academic traditions. Poor Leonard Bernstein, who was writing, melodic material when it was all about dissonance, and, Georgia O'Keeffe and, the abstract expressionists have a hard time getting, but by and large, I think that we have adapted culturally to the changing times very rapidly, and become part, and that has been very quickly become part of the mainstream, which is why I think we're the leading culture in the world. That's why everybody wants to, be part of American culture and know about American culture. Because I think we're right. We're not stuck. I think and we're pretty open. I don't think I answered that very well. I can tell you what I learned about artists. They're all troubled people. They, almost to a person, they had troubled childhoods, difficult childhoods, painful relationships with their parents, weren't supported in what they wanted to do, which is part of what makes their stories interesting. And they are fighters, and they believe in what they're about. There's a line they won't cross. There's a lot of similarities among artists, I think, as people. It's part of why they become artists. But it really is true.
It's a good answer, actually. What do you see as the future of American Masters?
Oh, goodness. I hope it survives. I really hope it survives, not just because I want to have a job. I hope it survives because if it doesn't, I think the new technologies, the feeling that people don't know the difference, that people are just going to watch on their computer, whatever, is going to make it very difficult to sustain the quality of this work. And that people are going to be expected, filmmakers in the future are going to be expected to make these films a lot faster and a lot cheaper and a lot more simplistically, That I am very worried about. I mean, that must be obvious in everything I'm saying. I'm very concerned about the future. But if we can survive, because we have a strong audience and we have a strong support system, and because we have a very prestigious name, I think we can keep that going, keep a recognition of that going on a consistent basis. There will always be a filmmaker who can raise $1 million to make a film, but if it takes them 10 years to do it. But if we're going to try to keep a consistency of this work, I think something like American Masters has to survive. Because once it goes away and it becomes something else, then it's very easy to say, oh, let's do it differently. Well, let's don't do it that way anymore. Let's do it cheaper. Let's do it on laptops. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So you know.
So I always feel like I'm fighting for the future of a whole kind of filmmaking.
Could they do without you? I mean, in terms of, you need to really have a fighter at the helm.
Well, I think we all fight in our different ways, but no, I'm not going to say it can't do it without me. But I have done it from the beginning, so I think it's harder to say. I think it's harder because I have been there from the beginning. I think it's probably harder to say, I'm sorry, you can't have an edit room anymore. But it would be very easy to say that to somebody else, somebody new. So, but there are always new fighters, and I'm not the only person who believes in great filmmaking. So, but I am concerned about the future, but I think PBS is very committed to the series, so hopefully it'll survive.
What do you think is the most important thing about PBS, about public television?
Quite simply, that our measure of success at the end of the day should be, and by covenant is, are we as good as we can be? Not how much money did we make at the end of the day. That is a huge, huge element, and a huge thing that distinguishes us from just about everybody else out there. Because as long as we can cover our costs and not lose money, that's the measure. And have we reached an audience that might not have been reached, because not everybody can afford cable. But mainly, I think it's artistic, that we are, whether it's news coverage that we're doing in a more investigative way, like Frontline, which is a fantastic series, or the long-form films that we're making, that we are charged with doing it as best as we can, as opposed to how cheaply we can do it, and whether we've turned a profit at the end of the day. That's got to change everything. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with commercial television. I mean, it is what it is, and there's a lot of great stuff on commercial television. But they have, at the end of the day, they have a different brief than ours, and I think that's what makes us unique, and that's what makes us most special. And if that goes away, who needs us? If we're just like everybody else. So, and I think we have a great leadership at PBS. I think they get that. Leaderships change and move and do it, but I think they get that. I mean, they are by act of Congress. Alternative television service. That's what it's called.
Do you ever feel, every once in a while there'll be the news stories of, oh no, it could go away. It's not necessary. Do you ever feel that it really is in danger?
Oh, I think, sure. I think the eroding audiences, eroding memberships, the economy, I think all of that is adding up to a formula that could be very, very dangerous for public television. But that's a whole other subject. You should interview somebody in public television about that. I mean, one of the management about that. Actually, it could be interesting, except I don't think anybody's ever been in the job long enough to be able to give you the whole perspective. But I mean, you read that, right? I mean, you hear people say, what do we need public television for? But I think we do. And I don't know that I've given you the best answer on why we do, because I have a very particular perspective. But I do know that we are in 100% of households, and cable is not. And that we can bring something to, just look at the arts. Just look simply at the arts. We can bring the arts to people who can't get to it any other way. They don't live in a city. They can't go and see the New York City Ballet or Broadway. And I think that's a real role we can and should continue to play. And we can bring thoughtful investigative journalism to them, and it's available to everybody, and it's free. And that's a very valuable service. Not to mention our children's programming. Not to mention Sesame Street. Imagine life without Sesame Street.
Well, what advice would you give to an aspiring documentarian today?
Marry money. No, I'm only kidding. I did kid talk. That was flip. But they do say that documentary world is becoming very much the world of trust fund babies because it's so hard to make a living. You get the money together for one film, and then you make it, and 5 years later you get your next film. How do you sustain a life that way? My daughter, I have two daughters. I have one who went as far in the other direction as she could. She's an agent at ICM in the indie division, doing very well. And the other who decided to be a documentary filmmaker. But I guess my advice would be, what I told her is, have a story to tell that you really are prepared to live with for a long time, and so you really got to want to tell that story. Don't give up, and know your market, know the marketplace, learn the marketplace, because you're going to have to be very wise about that and put things together and go to markets and meet people and figure out how to pull a lot of different resources together to help you make your film. And those that can do that and will give it the time and are smart and can really share that vision with other people, they're going to be able to make their film. They may not be able to make it for $1 million, but they'll be able to make their film. My daughter just got her first little film made. She did it all completely on her own. And really proud of her. It didn't cost her very much. And she did do it all on the laptop. I'm not saying that it's not possible to do. I don't want to sound like an old-fashioned person who says, oh, well, these new technologies are not for me. I just don't want to see us move in a direction where the new technologies you can't make the kind of films that we're talking about on laptops. You can't, because it's too much material and too much diverse material, and it just doesn't work. But there is much you can do on laptops. Simpler things that don't have a lot of archive, don't have a lot of different elements, all that kind of stuff. I would hate to see the technology begin to drive what you can make films about. I guess that's what I'm saying. And that we still need to have some of the traditional filmmaking tools to be able to make these other films. And that's what I fear about for the future, that the technology is going to drive what the films are going to be about, as opposed to saying, well, we still have to have this and that to be able to make this. Say, well, just don't make that anymore. That's my concern. And that could happen. And so then it will really become the realm completely of independent filmmakers who have their own equipment and just do what they can raise the money to do. And maybe that's all right, as long as there's a support mechanism for that somewhere. Are we done yet?
Almost.
Okay.
Okay, 2 more questions. We didn't really talk about being a woman in business. Has that influenced one way or the other anything about your career? Helped, hindered?
I don't think so. I really don't. I've never felt that I've been a victim of any kind of discrimination because I'm a woman. I've never felt that being a woman particularly helped. I think being smart and being passionate and working hard is what's been about. I think that there are still less women directors than I would like to see. I would love to be involved in. I remember once that I only hired women. I only had women on my staff, and I had only women directors. Because I was going so far in the direction of trying to boost that, but that's sort of gone away. I don't know, do you think that there's still a ceiling for women in this business? I don't think there is. I really don't. I don't. Others may feel that differently, but I haven't felt it personally.
And our last question is, how would you like to be remembered? 5'10", 110 pounds. No, I'm only kidding.
I think that if my series is remembered and is considered valuable and takes its place in, where it should be, then that's how I want to be remembered.
Thank you
Because that's
so
been what my life's been about.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.